Vampires are evil mythological beings who roam the world at night, searching for people whose blood they feed upon. They may be the best known classic monsters of all. Most people associate vampires with Count Dracula, the legendary blood sucking subject of Bram Stoker's epic novel Dracula, which was published in 1897. But the history of vampires began long before Stoker was born. The traits of modern day vampires are pretty well established. They have fangs, drink human blood, and can't see themselves in mirrors. They can be warded off with garlic or killed with a stake through the heart. Scholars suspect that the modern conception of these Halloween monsters evolved from various traditional beliefs that were held throughout Europe. These beliefs centered around the fear that the dead, once buried, could still harm the living. Often these legends arose from a misunderstanding of how bodies decompose. As a corpse's skin shrinks, its teeth and fingernails can appear to have grown longer. And as internal organs break down, a dark purge fluid can leak out of the nose and mouth. People unfamiliar with this process would interpret this fluid to be blood and suspect that the corpse had been drinking it from the living. Bloody corpses weren't the only cause for suspicion. Before people understood how certain diseases spread, they sometimes imagined vampires were behind the unseen forces slowly ravaging their communities. The one constant in the evolution of vampire legend has been its close association with disease. Trying to kill vampires, or prevent them from feeding, was a way for people to feel as though they had some control over disease. So are vampires simply a figment of the imagination, or is there truly immortal bloodsuckers walking amongst us? Tell me what you think following these 5 eyewitness encounters. Number 5. In the Shadows. Vampires walk among us, but these people aren't the stuff of nightmares. Far from it, actually. Just sit down for a drink with one of them and ask for yourself. That's if you can find one. They aren't necessarily looking to be found. I've spent 5 years conducting ethnographic studies of the real vampires living in New Orleans and Buffalo. They are not easy to find, but when you do track them down, they can be quite friendly. Real vampires is a collective term by which these people are known. They're not real in the sense that they turn into bats and live forever, but many do sport fangs and just as many live a primarily nocturnal existence. These are just some of the cultural markers real vampires adopt to express a shared, and according to them, biological essence. They need blood, human or animal, or psychic energy from donors in order to feel healthy. Their self-described nature begins to manifest around or just after puberty. It derives, according to them, from the lack of subtle energies their bodies produce, energies other people take for granted. That's the general consensus anyway. It's a condition they claim to be unable to change, so they embrace it. The real vampire community, like the legendary figure it emulates, knows few national boundaries, from Russia and South Africa to England and the United States. Particularly in the internet age, vampires are often well attuned to community issues. This is more true for some than others, though. I found the vampires of Buffalo to be keen to keep up to date with the global community, while those in New Orleans were often more interested in the activities of their local vampire houses. Some houses, and indeed whole vampire communities, as is the case of New Orleans, will combine their efforts to organize charity events like feeding the homeless. However, despite their humanitarian efforts, real vampires don't go around advertising who they are for fear of discrimination by people who simply don't understand them. Number 4. Vlad the Impaler. It's thought Bram Stoker named Count Dracula after Vlad Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracula was born in Transylvania, Romania. He ruled Wallachia, Romania, off and on from 1456 to 1462. Some historians describe him as a just yet brutally cruel ruler who valiantly fought off the Ottoman Empire. He earned his nickname because his favorite way to kill his enemies was to impale them on a wooden stake. According to legend, Vlad Dracula enjoyed dining amidst his dying victims and dipping his bread in their blood. Number 3. From the Grave. In 1990, a coffin was examined from a graveyard in Griswold, Connecticut. The lid of the coffin was decorated with the inscription JB55. When it was opened, Researchers found that the skeleton's ribs had been broken and that its skull and thigh bones had been moved from their natural places and formed into a skull and crossbones design over the figure's chest, which would suggest that whoever did that thought they were dealing with a vampire. Thanks to modern DNA tracing technology, scientists have been able to ascertain that the man was John Barber, a farmer who died in 1855, and that based on markings on his ribs, he appeared to have died of tuberculosis. It was believed back then that TB, which was called consumption, was spread to the living by the dead, or undead as the case may be, so it's likely that JB's coffin was exhumed so townspeople could check for any signs of vampiric activity after death. And it's likely that was when his ribs were broken and his bones were rearranged, since scientists estimate that he was originally exhumed 4 or 5 years after he died. Number 2. Vampire of Highgate Cemetery. Highgate Cemetery was constructed in London, England in 1839 as a burial place for the elite. After many years of neglect, the cemetery is now allegedly the home of a terrifying vampire. According to the Highgate Vampire Society, the sighting started in the late 1960s. A tall figure with red eyes was spotted and repeatedly reported. A young girl passing the cemetery was attacked by a very tall, white-faced, dark figure that threw her to the ground so hard that she suffered from scrapes on her arms and legs. Luckily, the shadow figure immediately disappeared when a car pulled up to the scene. The girl, who was in a state of shock, was taken to the police station and eventually told her own story. That story supported the sightings reported by so many other members of the community, and sightings of the vampire continue to this day. Number 1. Mercy Brown. According to Ghost Village, the story of Mercy Brown dates back to the winter of 1892. A resident of Exeter, Rhode Island, when Mercy's dead body was examined in the spring, it reportedly still looked alive. According to the legend, Mercy's heart was removed in order to end her wanderings.